Father Hyacinth, maybe, as we, and then we'll take questions at the end. We're going to begin the we'll begin this session just with a few brief announcements. So next week is our last class. I like to say this from the start. And it's the last class on parish history. It's going to be stories, people who are still living and remember St. Patrick's. So that will be just on Zoom. We will not have a live session next week because there'll be many people tuning in. It's going to be really beautiful to hear their stories. Additionally, the following week, which is the first Monday of October, we're going to have for the first 3 Octobers a sacred art series with Anthony Visco. He's a sculptor and painter from South Philly, and he is he's done classes here before, and he has a great one prepared for us. He's going to do one on St. Francis of Assisi because it's around his feast day, a sacred art class also on the Rosary, history of the Rosary, also in art, and then a last one too on light and shadows because the year is getting darker as the sun shifts, or the earth is shifting. Sun doesn't shift. I did pay attention in 6th grade earth science. So I want to start this class on the properties. We have done the people of the parish, the priests of the parish, now the properties of the parish, the buildings. And there's a lot of interesting stuff, but I want to begin with this very beautiful kind of video put together by there was a Swedish architecture student named Emil Anders, and he just knocked on our door with a camera right when we arrived here 2 years ago, and he asked if he could have access to the upper church because he heard that Rafael Guastavino's company from Spain and North Carolina had done the ceilings. And so he made this amazing video. It's just a couple minutes on our church. So I'll just play this now for a listening exercise. Very beautiful, because we're going to be talking about sacred space. And so this is a very beautiful presentation of that.
Oh, bring rapture to my soul. My soul, my soul. Oh, bring rapture to my soul. My soul, my soul. Oh, bring rapture to my soul. For your soul is vexed with rage. Oh, bring rapture to my soul. I will lift you up in the prayer. Oh, bring rapture to my soul. Rapture to my soul, my soul. Oh, bring rapture to my soul. Rapture to my soul, my soul. Bring rapture to my soul. I will lift my sister up. Oh, bring rapture to my soul. For her soul is wrapped in the shade. Oh, bring rapture to my soul. Rapture to my soul, my soul. Oh, bring rapture to my soul. Rapture to my soul.
All right, and yeah, I just found that to be sort of this amazing video for Emil, who is himself not religious. It's a very beautiful video of ceilings, right? If you had to film a video on ceilings, but also how he ends in the sanctuary, how he sort of comes forward to all the way. It's kind of the, I think architecture in that way, kind of, you walk into a church and it draws you towards the front where the most holy activity begins. I think even he did that with his camera, which is pretty neat. This next song is by Bill Monroe and the Bluegrass Boys. Why not? Here we go. And it is called Working on a Building, because we have had many buildings torn down and put back up and repaired, etc. So we're going to be working on a building. Donna Ferrara, you ready? Here we go. All right, we're going to go full screen, and this is another music meditation for you all.
Bill Monroe and the Bluegrass Boys not only are known as the originators of bluegrass in our country music field, but they're also the originators of being the finest group in our bluegrass field to do the old-time spirituals, and we've asked them to do our spiritual for today. And I believe you had something you wanted to say, Bill, before you do this.
I want to give Jack Green credit for booking us on your show here.
Yes, he called me the other day, and he said you'd make a good replacement for Jeannie Seeley.
We're fine.
So I told him just bring you right on out here. We're happy to have you with us.
Thank you. Let us do I'm working on a building.
That is a good one.
Building too. I'm working on a building. I'm working on a building. I'm working on a building for my Lord, for my Lord. It's a Holy Ghost building. It's a Holy Ghost building. It's a Holy Ghost building for my Lord, for my Lord.
Yeah, you got some chops. You got a little solo. Now we want to take a vote in the room. Who wants to watch the rest of it? Or we done? Who wants to watch the rest? All right, everybody, we've had our fun, but I'm working on a building. It's a Holy Ghost building. We get the idea. So we have here, what is the real presentation on our parish hall, not our parish hall, our parish, excuse me. Let me start the slideshow, and then we'll go from there. So, I want to say this too as we begin, that we're going to mostly focus on the main buildings. It's true we're not going to touch on, I mean, you don't want to hear about the repairs to the electrical, to the heater, the boiler. We do have a broken boiler, but we're not going to go through the whole history of boilers. We're going to focus on the main areas, but I do think those this is a Holy Ghost building, as the Bluegrass song says. This is a place where God has dwelled for 178 years since we've had buildings on these sites, and even before over at our first house church for 181 years. So I want to start first with Rittenhouse Square. This is just a real breeze through the area. You can see this is one of the earliest maps. There were creeks on the western edge of the city, and we are right there in the center, southwest square of 8 acres. That is still the size. So Rittenhouse Square, 8 acres. So if you jog or run around it, you can add that up. Here's the Schuylkill River after the year 1825. This surprised me. So I was reading up on the square, this neighborhood. It surprised me that, so 1682, William Penn got the charter for 1681 and then into 82. And Philadelphia was established. So was Pennsylvania. They're kind of established together. 100 years later, during the Revolutionary War, let's say Ben Franklin era, we're going to go, I was surprised to hear that there were no streets running west of Broad Street. So Spruce, Pine, Vine, whatever streets would end at Broad Street going west. And it was just forest. And that's in the time when important things were going on here. You did have some houses through the woods, so there were some properties, but there were no roads there. And you also had some taverns along the Schuylkill River because Ben Franklin wrote about some cruises he'd take down the river and they'd stop at taverns because he was Ben Franklin. That's what they did. But this is neat too, so you could see the transformation once the canals opened for coal shipping. I mean, this is the Schuylkill River in 1825, and it is not forest. So we're talking about 30 years or so where there was a radical transformation of these neighborhoods. And our parish too, soon after this was added. Here's the very first Catholic street, just a nice little thing. Manning Street still standing. You can see that on the right. So Manning Street was the first sort of Catholic workers, families moving in, still there. You also have the building 1857 of Holy Trinity on the square. This is from a little book I'll show you on Rittenhouse Square. Holy Trinity Episcopal being constructed. There are some people outside once Holy Trinity was finished celebrating. There's a nice photo. These people in the park in winter wearing hats. People used to wear hats more. That's an historical point, okay? Very good. This is 1859 at the opening, and I was shown here in the 1880s. This is another photo too, like what I had showed about the academy that used to be there, Notre Dame Academy, from the Belgian sisters, the Notre Dame Sisters d'Amour, with Sister Julia. That was the front of their academy. We talked about that. You also have, this is a photo I found of nurses in the park. I'm just showing old Rittenhouse Square photos. We're going to get to our parish right down the street. This is all kind of 1880 photos. Fun story here, just a little background. Do you all notice, because you've driven under this bridge before, if you go just north of us? So you have, in 1881, this Chinese wall. It's very funny. That's that train bridge running from 30th Street to Suburban Station. And it's ugly, and it's dripping oil, and it always was. We had talked previously about Mary Cassatt, the Impressionist painter, who lived with her brother in Rittenhouse Square, where the current Rittenhouse Hotel is. Her house was wrecked, as well as the neighbors, as well as the Academy of Notre Dame, to make Rittenhouse Hotel in the 1960s. Alexander Cassatt, her brother, was president of the Pennsylvania Railroad. And at that time, still, in the 1880s, things were shifty. So you had 5 city parks, very fun background story, because it's vindictive, it's perfect for Philadelphia, I love it. Your 5 parks, we talked about this previously, were meant to be just parks, but they took on, soon after William Penn planned them, very different uses. The Center Park, which is City Hall, long before their City Hall, that was the racetrack for dogs, for donkeys, for mules, etc. So that became the racetrack. Washington Square, which is southeast, that was actually, because of the Revolutionary War, down the street from Pennsylvania Hospital, Tomb of the Unknown Soldier, still a park. We were always hunting grounds until we started to get developed. And there was a competition between Rittenhouse getting developed and Logan Circle, which was Logan Square to the north, right outside the cathedral. Alexander Cassatt, now Logan Square before that was the execution grounds of the city. So there are actually a lot of dead criminals buried underneath that mermaid fountain. Scary to think about. It's a strange history of the city. But there were people that started to move north because they didn't want to be crammed in the city. So they started moving out of Rittenhouse north to Logan Square as the new chic place, until Alexander Cassatt, who lived on Rittenhouse, put a stop to it. He built, with the Pennsylvania Railroad presidency, this ugly train bridge going across the city to basically discourage people. Why would you want to go north of that disgusting bridge? No lie. That's part of the history of the Pennsylvania. So part of the reason Rittenhouse is nice is because of that ugly bridge. Now you know. Moving on. We have the Flower Society Flower Market in 1915, I think. So just some old photos of Rittenhouse Square. But you realize that that's developing really around the same time our parishes were sort of developing together. That's from a small book, The Perfect Square, History of Rittenhouse Square by Nancy Hines. And this was loaned to me by Theodora Landgren, who's one of our parishioners. This is my own photo. This is last Christmas, Rittenhouse Square, the nicest park in town. And here in Philly, we only decorate the trees as high as we can reach. I just found that to be really funny. At Christmas morning, it just like ornaments are, it's so Philly. It's nice, but it's also not. And I love it. I've learned to love it. So beautiful. Okay, that's my own photography. Why do I show this list? This is a list from the reunion of St. Patrick's School class of 1940. Because these are all the places that mattered to them. So you have the Avon Movie Theater, Miller's Meat Market, U.S. Naval Home, which still many of our families live in the U.S. Naval Home, Pete Donnelly's store, Killeen's Pub, so you have all these things, Shields Candy Store. That may seem random. Oh, we remember all the shops. But also, too, it's amazing that many of our parishioners were shop owners. So when we talk about the parish properties, which we're about to launch into, it's never just strictly church, parish hall, school, rectory. It's also people's homes and also their shops, and full of memories. Catholic life happens in the home as well. We're going to have a lot of stories about that next week, the October block collection, priests visiting, all sorts of things about people's own memories in the neighborhood. There's sadly only 22 families, Irish families, original to Schuylkill neighborhood west of here, that are still in the neighborhood. So you take hundreds upon hundreds, and we have 22 left. How things changed. But I like this photo because it has all of the shops listed from World War II era, and these were properties as well of in the parish, let's say. I also shown this too, this tiny little photo. I should have blown it up better. This is a horse-drawn milk wagon still in use in 1959, which is surprising. In the 1950s, they're still having horse-drawn. This is in South Philly, but they were also here in Schuylkill, just to show that. When the church was actually built, you could see a photo of it here. This is it, Old St. Patrick's. This was our church for about 70 years, which is already quite a history. It was expanded upon and added to. This is our first property. A few details on First St. Patrick's. Old St. Patrick's, $150,000 to buy the land, which is kind of a steal, but it was still developing. $150K, I'm using inflation. It was actually $6,000 in the year 1841 to purchase. At the laying of the cornerstone, it was preached, that ceremony, by the Reverend Patrick Moriarty of the Augustinians, the founder of Villanova. Very interesting. Founded Villanova, also was a missionary to India, and went on to have a big career, but he preached the cornerstone laying, and then we had this church. So the church designed by Napoleon Lebrun, as I had said, who also designed later on the cathedral. It was finished in 6 months, which is incredibly fast. Now, that doesn't mean everything was finished, so I want to read a list of gradual things. So 1842, the church is finished, and they're using it for worship. However, it was 3 years later, you have the rectory for priests built in 1845. 6 years later, 1851, you finally have pews. They had just benches with no backs to them. So that's 9 years just to get pews, because it was, again, we said, first class built during a 5-year depression. You also have the school built in 1852. We'll go over those slides. 1860, there was a new rectory. It wasn't until 1863, in the middle of the Civil War, we finally got an organ in the church. So how many years later is that? 1842 to 63. That's 21 years until we had an organ, pipe organ. 1883, we had another school. We finally got stained glass in 1885. Someone do the math. 85 minus 42. What is that? Help. I'm not good at math. 40. So 40 plus years before we had stained glass, just to give you a sense of the gradual process. At the very so there are two ceremonies worth mentioning. There's a dedication where a prayer is said over a church so it can be used. That's different than a consecration. The consecration usually happens years later when the payment of debt is finished, and there's an anointing of the walls with sacred chrism. They've already anointed the altars at the dedication. It's a very elaborate ceremony, which I describe some on our website version. But at the dedications, again, not the consecration later, the dedication was preached by Father Michael O'Connor. It's funny because there's a Dominican priest of ours who we both know, Father Michael O'Connor. He had this beautiful prayer, he said, when this church first opened. It's simple. He says, "Pour out your grace, O Lord, that all who gather here in this place may feel the effects of your mercy." I think that's a great theme, is that may people in this place, St. Patrick's Church, feel God's mercy. And he went on, Michael O'Connor, he had a great career, went on to become the first bishop of Pittsburgh, and then the first bishop of Erie. Then he quit both to become a Jesuit priest. His brother James went on to become the first bishop of Omaha. We talked about that last time, about how many priests in the area became bishops because there was such expansion. So many average, I'm not saying these guys are average, okay, but just your average priest saying masses oftentimes became bishops in those days. So I'll just, again, we had the first church, which was in a house, Stephen Kingston. This was the man, Stephen Kingston, who dragged that initial house from the Navy Yard on the Delaware River. They dragged it across town. It was an old carpenter shop, and then it was also a vinegar factory. That was our first church. This is the first church proper, Old St. Patrick's, for 70 years. Here's the interior, very beautiful. the neat thing to think about is that these altars, which were in Old St. Patrick's, the main altar and the two side altars in these photos are our present altars still in the Crypt Church, our present lower chapel. So they were preserved and have been here from the beginning of the parish, what we still have. Not the present one because of Vatican II, that mensa, not the one we use in the chapel, but the tabernacle, that high altar and the two side ones. You could see here, initially it was Christ on the cross. And then there were renovations later done by the old Dr. O'Hara. And you can see, this is from a little later 1870s, you could see how the painting was changed to the Virgin Mary because of the doctrine of the Immaculate Conception, recently declared. You can also see they've added altars. You can also zoom in and notice statues. So let me zoom in here to look at St. Alphonsus Ligouri. You can see St. Alphonsus here on the right, and this is the same statue we still have in our basement, St. Alphonsus. The same thing too with Christ and the Sacred Heart up here, same statue of Christ. So many of our statues were preserved from the old church. So these statues are over 150 years old, and what we know about them is that they were first associated with societies. So St. Rose of Lima statue, which is very old as well. I'm sorry, this is the Virgin Mary on the right. This is actually Christ up here on the left. You have the St. Joseph you see up on the right-hand side as we're looking above the altar. These statues are from the same place where they have that Passion Play. Sorry for my technical difficulties. The Passion Play, which is every how many years in Germany? Oberammergau is the place, that little, how often is the Oberammergau? Anyone? Every 10 to 12 years? Yeah, so this is where we got our statues for Upper Church and that are still in our crypt. We don't realize how old those are. They're preserved from our first church, from Oberammergau, from a single man who had crafted them. You can also see on the left-hand side the balcony. So we actually had a balcony. That was the Greek, this is kind of a Greek revival style. We presently have sort of a Byzantine Romanesque style, which is more early church. That's what they were going for in our present church. This is more Greek revival. We had a relic, a full saint relic, St. Boniface, now there's a St. Boniface in the 700s who was a German missionary and was martyred. That's who we celebrate every year in the church calendar. There's a thing called the Roman Martyrology, which is a very detailed list of all the saints. It's much more elaborate than our yearly calendar that we have at daily mass. There are 9 St. Boniface martyrs. And so this is not the major St. Boniface. It was a 4th century teenage boy who was martyred. And this was our priest, James Mulholland, who had gone over to Rome and brought back, that's a wax cast, but inside, creepy though it may be, is the full skeleton of the martyr, and there's a vial of his blood to the right. And there was a whole ceremony on that. That relic is still in our church. I mean, Jimmy Stewart, who will share stories next week, and other people remember as altar boys or choir people going and still seeing it in our lower chapel in their childhood. And there was a veil covering it. They would lift it up to make sure he's still there. I don't know, it's just kids. Because, they were kind of, what is that in there? And but the martyr is still sealed in our main altar in the lower chapel. So not every church has that, let's say. We have here other relics. This is just to give you a little photography on some of the treasures, I think, that we have, which are very few. We have very few treasures. But that is a tiny splinter of the wood of the cross. We have that in our safe, and we've put that out on our All Saints Day, our Vigil of All Saints. We've processed with saints' relics, and then also the wood of the cross. You can see the small splinter in the middle. We also have some of those relics of the early apostles, St. Andrew, Peter, Paul. Right in the middle, St. Matthew, whose feast day is today. We have St. Therese of Lisieux. These are all small chips of bone, very interesting. We have St. Patrick himself. It says St. Patrice, it's Latin, so it's a Patrice. So he was a confessor, an evangelist and a confessor. And then we also, a beautiful chalice from the year 1915. That's kind of it. We don't have a lot around here. We had the crown, which we went over the first class and presented, that beautiful crown made in 1900. There's the crown. I found this photo, it's fun. So the crown is for Mary, but sometime in the 1990s, they were putting the crown on a tabernacle, I think for the altar of repose for Holy Thursday, which is a beautiful instinct to crown that. I'd never seen that, but I found that photo just recently. Another thing too, so a couple other properties, like I said, during this period of building, we also had in the year 1860, our present rectory. This is our present rectory. We have very little that's fancy. I'm showing you the only nice rooms. The others are okay, but they're just kind of normal. This is our living room. And a lot of this, we had an antiques guy come in and say a lot of this is original. So that year before the Civil War, which is really kind of humbling and awe-inspiring to meet with us normal people meeting in these ancient rooms. And then our dining room there, just a glimpse, because other people, where do those priests live, etc. Okay, there you go. You have a small insight. So again, we have Dan Devitt in this time. There's the rectory there presently. That facade is from a 1978 renovation, so the front has been recently redone in brick. It looked pretty bad before then. Let's look here. This is a great photo. So here we have the 1860 rectory. The old school that I said was built in 1852. That's in the middle. And then you have Old St. Patrick's. Now, has anybody played the game of Tetris? You got to kind of rearrange the shapes and stuff. We had some Tetris on our block, and I know that's a cheesy analogy, but I want to explain. So what we had going from north to south, as you can see in this photo, right to left, was rectory, which was the most recent, 1860, then school, 1852, church, 1842. What happened is they wanted to build a new school in 1883, this present building we're sitting in, presenting from. And so to do so, they needed more space than this little sandwich place in between the two buildings. Check this out, ready? They found a guy from Jersey. No doubt, that's how this story begins. There once was a guy from Jersey. I need to look up his name. I have it here. His name was John Hughes, Irish, seemingly, from Jersey City, North Jersey, at that, basically, borough of New York City. And John Hughes, there was a 2-day process where they tore down the school in the middle. Try to imagine this. They tore down this school in the middle, and they dug a foundation, and they actually took our present rectory, this present building on the right-hand side, and they rolled it onto logs in a very gradual, slow process taking 2 days. They said it was so unnoticeable that they literally moved it. They shifted it half a block, this crew of workers, that the priest didn't even leave the house, or the secretaries or cooks. They just went about business as usual. What can I say? Jersey has a certain magic to it, you know? I'm not going to defend it in front of you all, but I think so I'll leave it at that. But they literally rolled our rectory very slowly into place next to the church so that they could build this present school on the site. Then, fast forward to the building of this new church. Well, they wanted to make the church bigger than Old St. Patrick's for space. And so in 1910 to 1913, they shaved off the whole left half of our rectory. So if you look at the rectory presently, it's 2 windows on the right, 1 window on the left side, because they literally shaved the building to make room for this bigger church. So we've had, that's kind of the Tetris game. There you have it in a single thing. We tear down the old school, shift down south the rectory, build a new school, tear down the old church, shave off a side of the rectory, build the new church. And we had to tear down some townhouses we owed behind the new church too. We owned 3 houses. Does that make sense? I think so. You can visualize it if you know the parish well enough. Here's what it turned out to be. So what we have now, again, is the school, and then the shaved rectory, which had a haircut, and then we have the present church. So that's the switch we did over the course of a couple of decades. There's another view there. Again, this is from probably the 50s. I'm not a car expert, but that gives you a sense of, that's the Dorchester, which during the Great Depression, the shops have been torn down. We had a gravel parking lot across the street from us. So let's look at a few things. We also had a bell. We rang the Angelus Bell every single day at noon and 6 p.m., 6, noon and 6 a.m., noon, 6 p.m. But in the 1960s, Monsignor validly explained that we'll not be ringing the bells anymore because people are complaining that they're trying to sleep. So we discontinued that. But that was here at the school. That was an event in our parish, and it dealt with the bell that we used to ring. So I'm letting you know. Here we go. In 1907, we acquired another property. So again, we haven't built a new church yet. Old church, new school, and new rectory. So we have those three buildings, and we buy this on Nowdane Street. If you just go over one block to 21st, go south to Nowdane, from 1907 to I think it was the 30s, 38 or so, we own this Parish Hall. When we got moving on building the new church, for those kind of that year and a half or so, we had masses in this Parish Hall. So this was actually our worship site for over a year or two, where they would house the Blessed Sacrament. There was a theater. There were also basketball courts, bowling alleys, all kinds of things. No lie, still there, and it's condos. There it is today. There's proof. There's a kid riding his bike on the right. I don't know his name. I took this photo from Google Street View. Here we go. So when we decide to basically upgrade the church, so we've already upgraded the rectory and the school in the 1800s. They both date from the 1800s. We've reached the 20th century, and in 1910, here's really our last photo of Old St. Patrick's covered in ivy, which the parishioners took home with them as souvenirs the very last day of Mass. I have a little timeline here. Let's go through that. So I want to say one thing too, before we jump ahead. We did have other properties. On a side note, in the Great Depression, we bought that place in Bucks County for a small time, May Hall. Like I mentioned, we had this ranch sort of in Bucks County for any families to go up with a priest to vacation. We also had townhouses, which often served as society headquarters, all of our different clubs. And then also for the sisters. We have the sisters' convent, of course, still next door. So we have had other housing properties, but it's just good to mention, kind of to be comprehensive. So what happened is that for about 10 years, this Old St. Patrick's had so much overflow that the 9 a.m. Mass would get so packed, they would also, in the new school parish hall, this parish hall, they would have a 9:15 Mass. So for 10 years, we had 9 a.m. Mass there, 9:15 Mass here. When you had a parish mission preached, that mission would go on for 2 weeks, and people would struggle just to get there, and there wasn't any space. So they had space needs at the turn of the century. So they have a parish meeting, and here is the timeline, is that in March of 1908, there was a parish meeting that decided, it was in this room, in this hall, let's build a new church. They set fundraising. In modern price, it would be $5.8 million. They set to fundraise. It actually cost $6.9 million, so $1 million more. So basically $7 million for the new church. And 2 years later, after fundraising, in the summer of 1910, it was announced that next weekend will be the very last Masses held at Old St. Patrick's, which for people was tough news, because this church was 70 years. It was this parish. Again, then during that summer of 1910, tore down Old St. Patrick's. Masses were moved to the Parish Hall, and they started digging. So this is a neat and really strange fact. August 1st, in the foundation, we laid the first wheelbarrow full of dirt and started to build the wall. Try to imagine this. Say you're walking into the lower chapel, St. Patrick's. Say you walk up towards the altar, behind that gold curtain, to the left side, not the corner on the left, but about 6 feet. It was that corner where they started to build this new church and the foundations. Now, it was in the opposite corner where you normally walk into the door, where we have the vault where the pastors are buried, a little stained glass window. That's actually where they found the old cornerstone. And they always fill cornerstones with objects, old newspapers, old coins, priests' books, all kinds of things. So they had these on display. So they dug up the old cornerstone, they opened it, they had it on display, they removed the foundations. And that's all making way. So that was on August 1st of 1910. August 2nd, that morning after the 6 a.m. Mass, the priest came back and they blessed all of the ground, all of the foundation with aspersions of holy water. And then what we have is this big event called the laying of the cornerstone. This is the front page of the Philly Inquirer from October 3rd, 1910. This was the largest event in our parish's history. 40,000 people gathered and thronged the streets, and it was It was a massive outpouring. I'll zoom in here. You can kind of have here Cardinal Van Italia, the man on the left, is the Pope's representative from Rome. He was in town. He didn't come overseas just for us. He was at a Eucharistic Congress in Montreal. He was the Pope's representative in Montreal. And on his way back to Rome, he stopped in the United States. He first went with his friend Cardinal James Gibbons to Baltimore. Then he stopped in Philly, and it was elaborate. They had a dinner for him in Philly. They had 5,000 Knights of Columbus greet him at the railroad station right up here on Sansom in the Schuylkill. That was the railroad station. Before he showed up to preside, to be present at our cornerstone laying, he had an incredible day. He had 4,000 people attended his mass at the cathedral. And then he visited Roman Catholic High School. Then they took a driving tour of St. Teresa's on Broad Street, St. Rita's, which the newspaper really funny calls, it is the most ostentatious edifice in our city. The Italian cardinal felt very much at home. It's funny they call St. Rita's ostentatious. They meant that as a compliment. Then he went and visited 4 parishes along Broad Street, and then went to lunch at the seminary in Overbrook, and then after lunch he came here. So he had this whirlwind day. So you have Van Italia on the left, Archbishop Ryan, who was the Bishop of Philadelphia, just to the left of him, Cardinal Logue, Michael Logue, who was also at this Congress in Montreal. He's the one who did the ceremony. He was the Archbishop of Armagh, St. Patrick's own cathedral in Armagh. So he's called the primate or the primate of all Ireland. So he's like the head of the whole Irish church. He's an archbishop. And he also, this was big news, he came and presided at this thing. You also have Monsignor Kieran with this halo on the very far right. Here, if you could see the upper, see the upper photo here, this is the side of the rectory, closest to the church. They set up a pulpit with Monsignor Kieran preaching and people just thronging the front street. We have more great photos. This is a great photo. Look at the angle here. So this would be, imagine you're standing in the same place as the priest in the upper church presiding at the altar. You're looking back towards the front doors. This is the image. This is the angle. And so you have the rectory on your left, not yet cut partially. So you have these brown awnings with American flags. Riddenhouse Square is straight on. You see that there? And so you could see the shops that have been built up. This is 1910. You could see some trees in Riddenhouse Square Park way back. And you can see that the Cornerstone is on the right side. So it's still on our corner here, the corner of Riddenhouse and 20th. And they built this whole wooden platform, etc. You could see this ramp down the center. They had processed out of this is like 4 o'clock in the afternoon. They processed out of the front door of the rectory, this whole train of people. I'll show you detailed photos. They processed down the ramp for this whole blessing of the foundation with holy water. But they didn't lead the procession. What was beautiful is that the sodality did. So all of the laity, the men and women in these societies, they were the ones that led the procession down into the foundation and filled after this parade. They had marching bands from West Catholic and other places. People were, you can see them sitting on the rooftops across the street. There was music and crowds, and there were actually 4 women taken to the hospital by ambulances, it says the newspaper, because of the crush of the crowd. After all these processions of these societies into the foundation, then came the priests, this whole retinue of them, to bless the foundation, and they processed back up. I'll show you that photo. Here they are blessing it. So there's Michael Logue with the holy water. You have this cross, the processional cross. They're just doing the outskirts with all of the people of St. Patrick's in the foundation. Here they are coming back up. So this is Monsignor Kieran, our pastor on the left here, wearing the biretta. This is here Monsignor John Thompson, who would be the pastor after him, our 2 priests, and Cardinal Logue. I mean, you could see the people standing on the foundations. It was crowded. I'm trying to show you. It was crowded. Okay. Sorry there. I'm going to start the slideshow again because I keep messing up. Here is sort of, you can see at the corner, there was this platform set up along our corner there in front of the property. You could see the stone itself. We still have that stone. It weighs 700 pounds, and it was taken, Cardinal Logue sent it on a ship ahead of him, but it was taken from the hill of Armagh, where St. Patrick's original cathedral was. It's beautiful. Our cornerstone is cut from marble, or from granite, excuse me, from the hill of St. Patrick's Armagh Cathedral. There was the blessing of the stone itself. Here's the cardinal doing so, suspended on ropes. He would actually place in the stone, he would bless the stone itself, place in the stone all the objects, priests, books, and commemorative coins and newspapers and this stuff. And then he would seal it over with concrete during the literal sealing ceremony. Neat side story, Hallahan High School, just north of us, right in Fairmount. Hallahan had their cornerstone. These were big ceremonies people would show up to. Theirs was pre-blessed in Rome by St. Pius X. He did it from his chair, and then they shipped it overseas, which is just an alternate version of bringing him over here. Here he is blessing. These are just really great quality photos. Cardinal Logue blessing and sealing the stone. Here's some priests looking. There were a lot of people. There were bishops, because of this Montreal thing in South Africa. There were bishops from the Caribbean. There were bishops from all over in town. There's Cardinal Van Italia, who gave the final blessing after this. So there was the blessing, there were speeches, and then there was his final blessing over everyone, and then they sang the classic hymn, Holy God, we praise thy name. It's sung now, it was sung in 1910, it was sung in World War II, as we were talking about with Monsignor Kelly last week. Beautiful to think how that's been over the whole century. Archbishop Ryan is the one who presided. He would die before the church was complete, and his replacement, Archbishop Prendergast, would be the one to actually dedicate our new church. It's funny, inside story, maybe I shouldn't say this, but why not? He's long dead, it's fun. He was a very, very tall man. Archbishop Ryan was known as the real great preacher of all the bishops we've had. Archbishop Prendergast was tall. I mean, I don't know what else he was, but if you go to the cathedral rectory, the priests have had us for dinner, they actually still have in one of the bathrooms his custom-made bathtub, and it's just this enormous bathtub because he was tall. William Howard Taft had a custom-made one too as president. People have these needs. Okay, so the beautiful thing about our cornerstone is that it actually speaks in the first person. This is really unheard of. There aren't other cornerstones that do this that I know of. It says, essentially in abbreviated Latin, I was cut from Ireland's Armagh Hill, given, blessed, and placed by Michael Cardinal Logue in the presence of Cardinal Van Italia and Diomede Falconio, who was from Washington, D.C., the Pope's representative from D.C. But it's kind of that beautiful first person. I was cut from this hill. I was placed here. I was blessed. The stone speaks. During those speeches, you had Monsignor Kieran give a speech we read from last week. You have a few other people, Walter George Smith, the lawyer from Penn, he married into the Drexel family, married Catherine Drexel's sister. You also had other people give, you could read that all online. There's elaborate speeches. The next day, newspapers came out, Cornerstone is mutilated. Someone had vandalized the stone overnight. They had chipped at it. I woke up this morning at 6 a.m. with crazy yelling of someone on the street saying, this is my sanctuary, get out of my church. And there's still craziness, okay? Craziness happens, we roll with it. We worship every day. So we were vandalized. A man spit on the cornerstone of Old St. Patrick's. So we've actually never had a cornerstone laying without trouble. So it goes. That was in the paper. Again, here's the rectory next door the side was cut off because of making space. So finally, a year later, so here is the old Crypt Chapel. This is the old lower chapel. You can see it's sort of that ribbed ceiling. We had an organ on the left side. Even if you zoom in, I'll zoom in here for the sake of just kind of, you could see in this amazing way, our original sanctuary had the altars, all three of the altars side by side. We had statues. We kind of had a big marble wall. Fascinating. I know that's not perfect clarity. We also had these gates of the Lamb of God, and we had a painting in the back, these angel paintings adoring. So just kind of a neat look at what the chapel used to look like. Let's tour through a couple more photos of the chapel. So here is the sanctuary when they'd hung the curtain for Holy Thursday. So this was the Holy Thursday altar of repose. They had a special repository sort of tabernacle. Neat thing, in the 90s, that was still used through the 90s, early 2000s, that old 1900s repository, even in our upper church. A little tour around the Crypt Chapel before we had tile. This was all brick. You had you had a marble wainscot on the lower part, but here's the cross. It's beautiful. We had the cross. There's this Irish devotion. The Irish Dominicans are called the Province of the Holy Cross. There's a real strong devotion to have a real cross that's right there with a large corpus. This is both upper and lower churches. Even the upper church, I'll show you the photo in a moment. When you walk out of our upper church, you have the big crucifix hanging over the door. It used to be on the side to the left as you walked out, again, so you could be near it and touch it. You could still see the markings of that. So they were in both. That's the only mirror image of upper and lower churches, was a devotion to the crucifix. You can see too here as we zoom in, those are the old Stations of the Cross before renovations. So very different, but very beautiful as well. We had other shrines. We had a miraculous metal shrine of Mary, which had its own kneelers, its own votive candles. You could see the old stained glass windows. All of this was renovated in 1954. So we're looking at the original 1911 version of this. Just interesting. What's that? This was on the left-hand side. So as you walk down towards the altar, halfway, it's on the left. This would be in the right. This would be in the corner where Therese of Lisieux currently is. First, they had St. Rose of Lima from the upper church. Funny enough, a Dominican, but also patron of abstinence societies, of abstaining from liquor. That was why we had her. A devotion, a shrine to the Holy Face. This was always displayed on the altar on Good Friday. So the Holy Face Society. But so just a brief tour. These were added later in 1935, midst of the Great Depression. So we added the Lourdes Grotto 25 years later during the Great Depression to lift people's spirits. And because it was the year 1933, which was commemorating Christ's crucifixion, 33. And so they built the Lourdes Grotto, and they also added Therese of Lisieux Shrine. Those are both added together. Let's move to the upper church. Fair enough, we're going to be photo-based here. So in the upper church, if we look at a tour of this, the upper church was built by an architect named Christopher Grant Lafarge. Christopher Grant Lafarge's father, John, worked in stained glass, New York City family. John Lafarge was very good friends with, I think his name is Louis Tiffany from Tiffany Stained Glass, so very well-known stuff, and they were best friends almost. He had many children, I think 9 children. One was an architect's son, Christopher Grant Lafarge, and another son, interesting, John Jr., who became a Jesuit priest and who has a very interesting history. He wrote an encyclical. It's called Pope Pius, he was Pope Pius IX, or was it Pius XI? There we go again, these Piuses. There was a hidden encyclical called Humani Generis Unitas, the human race, the unity of the human race. And it was kind of against anti-Semitism and racism. And funny enough, the Pope died right before it was published and was never published. But it was written by John Lafarge, the Jesuit, as a ghostwriter. So he's a New York family. And Lafarge, who designed our upper church, here's a blueprint. So you can see he designed the Byzantine sort of early church Eastern domes, all those broad domes. And you could also see the design here for the crypt church underneath. You could see all the ceilings there. Here's another quick look from the face of the church, the facade. We just got, actually, Princeton University has all of Christopher Grant Lafarge's drawings, and we just got from Princeton last week all of the original scans of our blueprints, which we now have digitized, which is a huge gain, which just happened, and we have those for future repairs. So the people who we have looking at future repairs of this parish have the original drawings as of this week, which is really great. So there is the church itself. Let's just look at a timeline. You know this church. You've been here, unless you're tuning in online, and then come visit us. Let's look at a timeline quickly. 1908 of March is the parish meeting. 1910, we finally finished the design and fundraising. And it was in July of 1910, the final Mass of Little St. Patrick's and the demolition. Again, 1910, we talked about foundations in the dirt being laid. October of 1910, October 2nd, which was Rosary Sunday, was that great day of the Cornerstone. 1911, the lower chapel is dedicated. So 1 year they built the Crypt Church, the lower chapel, which is impressive. workers, turn of the century. Oh yeah, 1 year they built it. That would never happen today, no matter how good of a pastor or construction people. I don't care who you are. The human race is not as good as it used to be. So I don't know if that's true. I'm just saying big phrases. 1913 of March, the upper church is dedicated and open. So let's do the math there. If you skip ahead, that's basically about 15, 16 months. So they built our upper church in a year and a half, and the lower church in a year, which is just incredibly impressive if you look at the timeline. So to go through some photos, you have the terracotta. This is the apex here, and you can see just some of the artwork, just for viewers' sake. We can see St. Charles Borromeo, our neighboring parish. You can see from our roof, so you can see how close the parishes are just to the south of us. You can also see our whole property from the Dorchester. Somebody sent me that. Yeah, they just said, here's a picture of your property. Great, yes.
How did you get some of those other pictures? Was it from
These pictures? Oh, you can just climb on the roof. I'll show Father Hyacinth how to climb on the roof later, yeah. That's how I got them. These are personal photos from my personal collection. I did, yeah, there's easy access with ladders. It's not too dangerous. So you have these views of our church. So here is the view initially when it was first built. You don't have the gold dome. Obviously, that's still brick. It's very simple. The lighting was just right down the middle. And so this was, but still, like we opened with the video, the ceilings alone are, again, it's the Guastavino Tile Company. Now Raphael Guastavino had died. He's the one who did the shrine in DC. He's the one who did the Great Hall at Ellis Island. He's done state capitals. And so it's very light tile work for the domes. Our dome is 80 feet tall from floor to top, which is tall, and it's especially narrow. We were constrained. We couldn't build a very broad church, so it's kind of like a narrow rectangle, and that's why it appears. I have maybe 80 meters. I thought it was just 80 feet. We can talk later. I don't know. And you could see here, let's go through some photos. Where's the tile from? I know you were so interested in finding out about the tile. Detroit, actually, the Pewabic Pottery Company. Father George is our first pastor from Detroit, so there's a little connection, a little providence. Anybody? Maybe not. But you could just kind of see some things. Look, there's of course the view from the balcony. Now watch this full of people. This is a really early photo from the 1930s for our 100th anniversary, the Centenary Mass 100th anniversary, and there's the same place full, which is just impressive. They probably had not enough room for everybody. So a few more things. Here is the invitation. We still have that. It's beautiful from the year 1939. In 1940 for our oh, I'm sorry, this is an invitation from 1913, the very opening of the church, the dedication by Archbishop Prendergast. So we still have that on file. If you zoom in too, we're going to go up towards the sanctuary. We had a very funny pulpit. So you could kind of see it had this whole sort of shade over top, which has been amended in time. Just giving you some views. We used to keep the cross and candles up on top of the balcony. The balcony was the choir loft, we talked about the kids getting in a fist fight in the choir loft last week. It was placed on top not just to be trendy and artistic. It was placed there because they only had limited space and they wanted 3 full sections of stained glass window. And if you added a choir loft in the back with organ, it would just cut one of those sections out or in half. So they wanted full stained glass. And so they got creative and built the choir loft above the altar, funny enough. Here we used to have as well, so this is funny, we used to have this little protector, this sort of covering, the baldacchino over the cross in the tabernacle, you could see there. It's been removed. Those 4 columns are now our candlestick marble columns in the lower church. They're moved down there. I was here for 2 years having masses and didn't know that. But it's interesting too that it's just, there's no images. We have just plain marble, and that was the style. It was sort of going for this early church style, I suppose. But they did in the dome above. You have that brick dome above. And then they put gold leaf. There is an early 1940 commentary where the parish plans were, this is provisional, this gold leaf, until we can add an image. They did want to add a holy image. We're not sure what, St. Patrick, something else. They wanted to add an image in our main, the apse above the altar, the golden dome. They wanted to, right? So that's the statement. We haven't yet. Here's the dome itself. You get this Irish bricklaying, just to show you some photos from the property. This is above the dome, above the main dome, crawling to the center crawl space of the, and then you also have just a few looks there. We also had a vault built. So we have 3 priests, like I had said, Monsignor Kieran, Monsignor Thompson, Monsignor Vallely, buried in our lower vault just before it was renovated. Another beautiful view of our tile. I like to think of this is right above the main altar in the upper church. This is the Poabic tile. It's a Greek cross, symbols of the 4 evangelists. I love this spot because so many people have been married on it. It's beautiful to think how many couples have professed their vows. So the priest says all the prayers over the altars, and those are sacred places. But I like to think this is sacred as well, because it's where all of our marriages take place over the years. Again, I mentioned the cross. This is, as you leave, it used to be on ground level to the left. Here's the altar boys, or the choir boys, using the upper balcony back in the day. Just a good photo there, looking very attentive. I'm just going through ceremony photos just to give you a sense of what liturgy was like. Interestingly enough, we didn't have an altar rail, though that is very traditional. In 1930, they didn't build one. Later on, we added an altar rail at Vatican II in 1964, which is completely backwards because people were removing altar rails. And then we kept it until the 90s. So there was a bishop that came and said, why don't you have an altar rail? And they said, well, the designs, and again, those are 1910 designs. That's Bishop Lamb, St. Patrick's Day, 1939. Just some good ceremonial photos. Choir boys singing. They're not singing, they're actually posing, let's be honest. It's just a pose. I can call a bluff when I see one. We also, well, there's more, okay. More singing, more singing, more singing. Here is the same 1939 Mass. So this would be prayers at the foot of the altar as he first arrives. And we'll just continue with a few brief photos. Here's another few things as well. They've built this throne on the left side many times for presiders and stuff. Anyway, just to give you some looks into the past, okay? They had amended the pulpit in the 1950s. And then you could just kind of see here some amendments, people kneeling just as they are. Let's go to stained glass. Stained glass was added later. It's from Munich, Germany. It's the F.S. Zeitler Company in 1925. So basically 12 years after we finally added stained glass, and it's magnificent because we mostly have brick and marble and terracotta with no images. Just to give people an idea of how to trace the stained glass, I'll show you in a moment. You would start on the lower right-hand side. So you have, these are the parables of Jesus. So you start on the lower right-hand side, you go up, and then you cross over and you come down the next column. So you come down this column. It's actually beautiful. If you walked in the front door of our church, the upper church, and you start on the right-hand side, bottom right, and again, you go up that right column, down the next one, up the next. It traces from the creation of angels and Adam and Eve in the garden. It traces the Old Testament, and then the early life of Mary and the early life of Jesus, then the parables and public ministry of Jesus. You cross the sanctuary, and in that front left section, you have the passion and death and resurrection of Jesus, Paschal mystery. You move back towards the front doors. You get the early church and Acts of the Apostles. And right as you reach the doors on the left-hand side, you have saints and the church, the history of the church. So it's this whole history. And you have St. Tirticawitha, John Neumann, St. Patrick, St. Bridget, etc. Just some beautiful details. Jonathan Smith, who is a parishioner, if you go on our website, he has incredible detailed photos of our stained glass windows. I just compiled a few of them. because they're really great if you take time to go through the details. We also have booklets in our published books where it actually gives you, it names every scene. So we do have published booklets. So these have been well studied by now, which is really neat. It was specifically Trinitarian, so St. Patrick and the shamrock, a symbol of the Trinity and 3-in-1 in teaching. That was specifically why we have 3 sets of stained glass windows in the nave, 3 sections of the nave, 3 small arches, and then also why we have the sanctuary, so 3-in-1. It's why we have 3 doors but 1 porch. It's why we here have 3 stained glass windows in the back of the theological virtues, but 1 rose window. So there's this Trinity symbolism, which is neat that they were thinking about that in designing the church. These are the same windows on the right. They're just crammed together and in better detail. Faith, hope, and charity. So let's get into the renovations. This is the last section. So we talked about old St. Patrick's, new St. Patrick's, and how have our present properties been renovated. We have a lot of correspondence. So we've had 2 major renovations. 1954, which was a Marian year because of the 100th anniversary of the Immaculate Conception. So again, there's this Marian year and they do these renovations. And then 1964, 54 lower church, 64 upper church for the consecration because we were finally paying off the debt. I love the correspondence. So our main architects for the lower church were Gleason and Mulrooney. Here we have tons of correspondence in the binders on the side here. I brought those. And John Mcshane. We'll talk about him in a moment. John Mcshane basically was the builder for the one who, this is an awesome letter. Gentlemen, the marble work is progressing entirely too slowly to meet the opening date of December 8th that Father Valles has designated. Would you please urge your marble subcontractor to man this job with more mechanics? Anyway, we have a lot of these letters. They're funny and people are fighting and a lot's getting done. Just to look at some other people involved, because when you read through these, you get the sense that there were many companies who have put their work into our church. Ave Maria Stained Glass Studio out of Brooklyn. They're the ones who are present stained glass of all the Marian apparitions. It became renamed Chapel of the Apparitions of Our Lady. Those are from Brooklyn. Felix Lorenzoni is the Italian marble guy from the Bronx. He and his contacts in Pietrasanta, which is the west coast of Italy, and Venice, via the Bronx, he arranged and they constructed, dare I say so for an Irish church, in Italy, they constructed the Book of Kells shrine, our baptismal font in the crypt, and also just a few of all of our hand fonts as you walk in. So Felix Lorenzoni was important from the Bronx. George Cicarescu was I think a Romanian immigrant, and he lived down near the airport, and he did a lot of woodwork. The pews, he refinished the pews. He built our marble altar and our altar rail in 1964 in the upper church. And he and John Mcshane fought a lot because, you could see he was talented, but he wasn't exactly formal. He didn't type out his letters. You get the idea. Okay. You also have this, so take this small letter I dug up. T and M O'Connell, parishioners from North Ariana Street, which is northeast Philly. They were asked to take our relic, St. Boniface, and to clean and redress him for this new renovation. They even were sending relics to the family's home. So there are parishioners intimately involved. Our sanctuary lamps on both sides in the lower chapel now were from this little fabrication place in Germantown. We had our marble altar in the lower church is from Vineland, New Jersey. We preach from a Jersey pulpit every day. There's a lot of people involved in this. The upper church in 64 was by 2 people, Rambush out of New York, so they came and designed it, Harold Rambush. And also Adolf Frey and Sons. These are the painters. These are the ones who put in the gold leaf in our dome, in our upper church apse. So Adolf Frey and his sons, and they did a lot of cleaning. They cleaned the entire surface of the church, which before better car mechanics, they said these whole documents how filthy the church was just from open air. Something we don't think about nearly as much these days with protocols. Also, James Molyneux are the ones, they built our present altars, which are facing the people instead of facing Ad Orientem, and so he was out of Drexel Hill. So we have all these names and records of who did the work, which is neat. And we have more correspondence. Let's look at John Mcshane, who renovated the chapel in '54. John Mcshane with his daughter Polly. She became a religious sister of the Holy Face, who ran St. Leonard's Academy. So it's kind of neat. John Mcshane was a very big deal. Here he is with Queen Elizabeth II. So John Mcshane is nicknamed the man who built Washington. He built, with his company during the Great Depression, Library of Congress reading rooms. He built the Pentagon. He renovated the White House. It's the most major renovation ever done to the White House. They basically rebuilt the whole thing. He built the HUD building, Housing and Urban Development, right across from Father Hyacinth. He built the Department of Agriculture, which is enormous. He built Reagan Airport. He built Bethesda Naval Hospital. He built the National Shrine where I was ordained a priest, where I made my final vows. And he also rebuilt our lower chapel because he was a parishioner here. He lived in the Barclay building on Rittenhouse Square. He owned that. It was a hotel, and he lived in the penthouse. And again, it's amazing for me, providentially, to think I was ordained in a church built by this man, and then I went to his home parish and have Mass there every day. It's just the connection I feel really humbled by. So John Mcshane did so much work that his doctor told him to stop. So later he got into horse racing. He's meeting Queen Elizabeth because he had stables in Jersey. Jersey keeps coming up. I'm not doing this on purpose. I'm not trying to make people mad. He became very big into horse racing. He also owned an estate in Ireland where he and his wife lived. And it was this estate that they gave upon their death to the Irish government. It's Ireland's only national park. It's in Kilkenny in County Kerry, the southwest. I've been there before, not knowing it belonged to the Mcshanes. If you look here, we have some old people. So Bill Logan is the present funeral director who's all around this neighborhood. This is Bill Logan's grandfather, so this is Bill Logan the first here. John Mcshane is just to the left of him. These are sort of the workers or who have contributed to the parish. You have other people too. Nancy Tobin, who teaches catechesis for us. This is her grandmother, upper right-hand corner. You have Mr. Foy, I think was his name, who sold newspapers. Older parishioners can totally correct me on that. So you have kind of all these people at work. This is an incredible letter. I'm going to read it word for word. This is after the 54 renovations were finished. Dear Father Vallely, I was overwhelmed with your letter of April 6th and hasten to express my deep appreciation for your graciousness. I do not recall when I enjoyed working on a church as much as I did your own St. Patrick's Chapel. Letters such as you wrote to me are priceless, and suffice to say I will cherish it along with few other precious letters which I received during the course of construction of the Franklin D. Roosevelt Library, the Jefferson Memorial, and the White House. I cannot tell you how happy I am to note that you are satisfied with your decision of Gleason Mulrooney and ourselves build your chapel. Many thanks, with kind personal regards, John Mcshane, which is a really amazing letter that he held building our chapel in his heart on par with the White House. We still have these letters, they're here. So it's just, he's an amazing man, and he was our parishioner here, and this was his home parish. Here is the renovation. You see it. If you want to know what John Mcshane did to the lower chapel, just go there. Okay, it's present. He put in all this, you can see how they closed off the sanctuary, this marble tile work. So we have some Connemara marble in the upper walls, but down here, our actually main marble is called Marqua tile. It's Vermont. Most of our marble in the lower church is Vermont marble. Marqua series from the Vermont Marble Company. They did keep in a few stained glass windows. So this stained glass window of the Holy Face behind St. Cecilia is preserved. So that was not touched, just an interesting thing. Same thing with St. Therese. Some things remain the same. But our other stained glass was replaced with these other ones. Funny story too, there's a letter I found. So there's one of these things where it's Our Lady of the Universe, or Our Lady of, and it's kind of Our Lady's protection over all creation. And the flag over top of her is actually, it used to be a United Nations flag. And Monsignor Vallely wrote, funny enough, to the Brooklyn studios, Ave Maria, saying, it is very doubtful that this new institution called the United Nations will last very long. So please instead substitute the flag for a globe, not the United. So they did. We have a globe flag now. UN's still around, but just these funny details of correspondence. There's Monsignor Vallely with his copy of the Book of Kells. What were we saying, Todd?
Well, it's interesting that we have Our Lady of Washington down there too.
Right, and I don't know that I don't have correspondence on that. Why Our Lady of Washington? But well, here's Lourdes knock. But yeah, there she is down there. Monsignor Vallely had his own personal copy of the Book of Kells. It is a copy, so he donated that to our shrine. Again, I said Felix Lorenzoni. This is funny. They messed up the spelling. They spelled it K-A-L-L-S, the Book of Kells, and it arrived from overseas, and the parishioners here were not happy. So the next project in 1955, the year after, here's just some mosaic work. This is all Venetian mosaic in Gaelic patterns. With this cross, this is just a zoom in on the Book of Kells shrine, just to give you a glimpse. The next year they did the baptism font, our third one. We had the rickety old wooden one. We had another marble. This is our third from 55. You could see the original designs by Gleason and Mulrooney, the architects. You could see Felix Lorenzoni's designs from the Bronx in blue. And then also we have the finished product. It's very beautiful. It's still present in our chapel. However, you could see this fun thing. So it's from Botticino marble, south of Brescia. This is literally the hill where our marble came from. I found a photo. I looked around. It took a while. And you also have this. So you have St. John baptizes Christ, St. John, etc. So you have this mosaic. It's funny that because of that previous typo, they sent us this whole letter here, which is funny. So it says St. John in prison. Here's the letter, and in Italian at the bottom, I'm not perfect, but it basically says, here are our translations of the little titles. You might want to spell check this. So like, they have this crossed out, like instead here, it says like St. John baptizing Christ, you know, with just an N, you know, baptizing, it says St. John baptizes Christ. Just things that are glad have spelled right. So the overseas miscommunications, John in jail, we changed it to John in prison. Just a fun part of what happened to this. We also have some stained glass in our lower sacristy. Most people don't see this unless you come in to buy a candle. There are these beautiful stained glass windows of American saints in our, that was put into in the 54. They put the stained glass into. They're all female foundresses, correct. Catherine Drexel, yep, etc. So St. Dominic, I want to say one thing too, is that this was not original to the chapel. The Dominican sisters of Elkins Park used to live right up the street. And in 2001, when they left Kate's Place, that present place called Kate's Place, which is a sort of low-income shelter, they gave us from their chapel this Dominican statue, which was put next to the Dominic stained glass. So Windows 54, statues 2001. I mean, older, but it arrived here. This is how I got that. Some woman slipped this in my box. Lucy Eden Smith, there she is. That's their old. Anyway, someone told me about the history. So then the upper church, we had 64 renovations. I'll just go through those very briefly. In 1964, in December, we had the consecration. We finally consecrated the church because debt was paid off, the sacred blessing. And then we celebrated 150 years. It made the front page of the Catholic Standard Times newspaper. Even the city wrote us, this is beautiful, the mayor actually wrote a letter for 125th, congratulating us. It's very American language. The spiritual life of the citizens of Philadelphia is ministered to by many dedicated clergy of the city who often sacrifice personal comfort to preach the word of God. It's beautiful, but it's different rhetoric, you know. It is fitting, therefore, that the city of Philadelphia pay tribute to St. Patrick's Roman Catholic Parish as it celebrates its 125th anniversary. This is the renovated church with the new altar rail in 1964 and the gold apse, and it was cleaned thoroughly by the same guys that did the ceiling. It's the church you see today. Just a great comparison between the old brick and the gold leaf. We'll just look very briefly to here. So other things were put in. Beautiful thing, Nicholas Turon, who was a parishioner, he designed and drew our Stations of the Cross, which were put in 1964. So these mosaic Stations of the Cross were designed by a parishioner and then done in Venice. Also, it was Italians, I'm sorry to say that, but they also designed the bronze Celtic, the holy water fonts. They did a good job. You got to admit that. The mosaic stations in the lower church were designed by a Father Joseph Quigley, one of the priests who was a parochial vicar like myself. So both upper and lower Venetian mosaic stations of the cross were designed by people at the parish, which is a really neat fact. There's the altar rail there during the Christmas pageant and around the year 2000. Just a few photos. Here is the invitation. We still have the invitation to the 125th. And then here are a few photos of the 125th. We have, I think that's Bishop McDevitt coming in from the baptistry. This was designed, this is in the back of the church. If you walked into the upper church just to the right, there's a closet. It was designed to be the baptistry for baptisms, but we've always used the lower chapel. We actually never used this. It was built for that, but never implemented. So for a long time, it was used as the priest's just chapel to pray, and then also as a connector to the house, which is why they used to process in for big masses from the house to the back of the church. Here's Father George O'Donnell preaching. We had showed this last time. They're very serious men listening to him. And full church, which is the 125th. There's the Sisters of St. Joseph on the left. Many other people gathered. So it's the church as we know it today. The lighting was redone. All this lighting we see presently used to just be down the middle. So everything, lighting, electric. I mean, all the boring stuff happened there. During these renovations, you also had boilers, lighting, electric, roofing. There was a lot of necessary stuff as well as aesthetic. Here is more photos from the balcony of our 125th anniversary Mass. There were children confirmed. There they are, getting confirmed. There's a good photo. The bishop is seated, confirming them. They used to, back in the day, slap you on the face to say, be tough, life is tough, be a strong Christian. That can still be done. It is done sometimes, but you'd have to tell the kids ahead of time, I think, if the bishop's gonna, it was more ceremonial, I think, about being tough in confirmation, to be confirmed and strengthened. There's Archbishop Kroll, who was cardinal at the time, Cardinal Kroll of Chicago, and he was, this is a little later, this photo, but there's the man who presided at the consecration. Our parish hall was renovated in 1995. It's not a flattering photo. I'm just landing the plane. So we have all of our beautiful present buildings. We have the parish bazaar. That was last year. I'm just showing you how the parish hall has been used. I think that might be the end of the slideshow. So let's do this. We can take a few questions, but that's essentially, that's it, people. That's the show. So do a small round of applause for the parish. For the parish. So we've done people, priests, and properties, and yeah, we have very beautiful space to go to church. So any questions from Zoom or outside or here? Father Hyacinth, you have the floor.
Yes. Can you say a little bit about the convent?
So the convent, so our convent was built post-Civil War. I think it was 1864, I think mid-Civil War. And the convent was built for the Sisters of St. Joseph, as I had said last time. They'd gotten moved around different townhouses, so we wanted to build a permanent house for them. And the sisters were here, I think, 117 years teaching at our school. So incredible part of this parish history on everybody's mind. They were always at 6 a.m. Mass, always teaching our children. The neat thing too about property, so we have this tiny little parking lot that maybe some of you have walked across to go to the restroom. So to get to there are no restrooms in the church. You have to walk across this little parking lot. Now it's a parking lot that fits about four cars. Then this was the school assembly ground and playground. So anyone that went to school here would line up. I mean, people like Tim McSorley can tell you, oh, at this side of the alley here, that's where third grade, then fourth, and the other ones were here. So they still remember this was our playground back here. And it was even so crowded, this school, that some students on the upper floors would actually exit. This is from Judy across in Sanicki, who told me the story. They would actually exit through the sisters' convent, the main stairwell. So that was part of the leaving school. Some would go the front door, some would go the back, and some would go through the sisters' convent. They remember peeking into the dining room as they're walking past, or just kind of this whole curiosity buzzing because they got to exit school. They exited school twice a day. Our school kids would go home for lunch, and then also at the end of the day. And they had all routes, is what I'm saying, even through the sisters' convent, which was connected to the church. And then we also had another townhouse next to that, which we still have and rent out. Those are the Notre Dame sisters that taught, because they didn't have enough space at the academy. So we have those properties. Anybody else?
What was the last year of the school?
The last year of the school was 1972, I believe, 73, 71. Somebody, I had it written down, but that was when the sisters left and the school shut down. Yeah. So we still have Rectory. Well, the school's still up and running, Philadelphia Youth Orchestra, etc. Do we have things in the chat? Hold on. Let me look at the chat real briefly. Losing audio, Father. Glad to have it. Okay, can you show the picture full screen? This is being recorded, so you can go back on YouTube, see it full screen. Beautiful stained glass window. There is a beautiful stained glass window by John Lafarge at the Philadelphia Museum of Art. It is called Spring. Good comment, something to look for by John Lafarge. And then there's just a few messages of thanks. So if there aren't any pressing questions.
Father?
Yes, please.
Yeah, we also owned, the parish also owned a few small houses on Rittenhouse Street.
Yeah, we did own houses on Rittenhouse.
Because I went to nursery school there.
You went to nursing school in the parish house?
Nursery school.
Nursery school.
From the age of 2.5 to 5.5.
I know that we had wrecked some of those churches or some of those houses to make room for the new church. And I know we even had other ones in the 1980s and 90s. Up until then, we eventually sold them. We were hoping to actually make a little parking lot because we had, I think, 2 houses behind us, but we needed a third. And then they were all declared in the 80s historic register properties, and so they couldn't be touched. So this dream of a parking lot, it wouldn't have been much of a parking lot, so it probably is better that they're on the historic register. But right, we had those up until what, the 80s and 90s. Still.
Yeah, that was the nursery school before you went to.
Who's speaking? I'd love to.
My name is Pat Henningsen.
Pat, I have your email. We're going to talk because if you have stories, you're getting on next week. I got you. Thanks for speaking up.
Okay.
That'd be great. Anybody else too? Speak up, or we'll wrap up. Okay, let's pray. In the name of the Father, and of the Son, and of the Holy Spirit, amen. Lord God, we thank you for the time that we have spent in this place, in this church, in this parish hall, the classrooms, any sort of just in this place which has been blessed by you, which has been frequented by so many of your people, by which so much of you have been so at work, Lord, in this place. And so we thank you for it. We ask that you continue your work in our hearts, but also in our hearts as we live and worship and learn in this place, St. Patrick's. So we give you thanks, and we ask you to continue your good work through Christ our Lord. Amen. In the name of the Father, and of the Son, and of the Holy Spirit. Amen. Thanks, everybody. And again, next week, we'll just be on Zoom, and we'll have a lot of stories, people chipping in. It should be, as the state of West Virginia's motto is, wild and wonderful. We'll see. Okay, thank you. That just came to mind.